Engage for Success Radio, raising the profile of employee engagement and shining a light on good practice for people who believe there's a better way to work.
Good afternoon and welcome to Engage for Success radio show number 652, the results from our 2026 engagement survey. Today we're going to be talking about those results. I'm Jo Dodds, part of the Engage for Success volunteering team and your host for today. The Engage for Success movement is an inclusive movement committed to the idea that there is a better way to work by releasing more of the capability and potential of people at work. We spread the word about employee engagement and shine a light on good practice, inspiring people and workplaces to thrive. And we're widely supported across the UK, involving the public, private and third sectors. If you go to our website, engageforsuccess.org, you can use the link at the bottom of the page to join our newsletter list, and all our social media links are there too. My guests today, two guests, are Sarah Pass and James Court-Smith, who, amongst other things, are part of the Engage for Success Advisory Board and responsible for our report, our survey and report. So welcome, Sarah, welcome, James.
Thank you.
So, did you want to start by just telling us a bit about who you are and sort of your involvement with Engage for Success, and then we can get into talking about the report from there. Sarah, did you want to start?
Yeah, no, thank you, Jo, and thank you for inviting us along again. It's always nice to come back and be able to talk about the latest research. I'm Sarah Pass. I'm a senior research manager at the CIPD. Although a few months ago I was working at Nottingham Trent University, who's been a big supporter of the research for quite some time. And I'm also involved in many different aspects of all the fantastic work that Engage for Success do as well. James.
And yes, James Court-Smith. I'm a data scientist. I run a business analytics firm and have been passionate about engagement for a good 25 years and a supporter of the movement from the start. But yeah.
Yeah, right from the start, you were heavily involved in the first report and the evidence and all that sort of stuff and throughout. So great to have you here, James. And Sarah, perhaps you can tell us a bit about our survey now. We've been running, I think this is the fourth, isn't it?
Yeah, so we did the first one back in 2022, which for those who weren't around or weren't aware of it then, was largely, obviously we were kind of slightly coming out of the pandemic and a very different way of working. So we're keen to kind of gather some information around the impact on engagement. And I think as well, it was also in response to many, many years of people within the Engage for Success community asking us for more information, data, but that was sort of more UK specific, and with that could actually provide some more depth and insights. So I think from day one, it's always been about those actionable insights, bits of information that actually, Monday morning, the quick wins, you can go in there and do that, but equally the things to be focusing on and to kind of gather the information and the data to help organisations in their sort of long-term planning as well. And certainly from other organisations as well that we've spoken to, they might have been collecting data, but they, what is good? What was they've got a figure and they can look at what that figure was last year, but how does that relate to other people? So we were keen to kind of start looking at some kind of benchmark, but then equally aware of the fact that there were many people who were just struggling to know how to even measure engagement, how to do it. And largely there were organisations of people who didn't have huge amounts of resources, be that either funding or time to be able to do that. So yeah, back in 2022, we established the Engage for Success Engagement Index, which is based on 3 simple questions. And that kind of enables us to measure many different things. So yeah, we've been going for a while.
Lovely. And James, perhaps start by telling us a bit about how that survey works, as in who is it, how predictive it is, and where that calculation came from.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a representative survey of the UK workforce, which is why we're able then to talk about the state of engagement in the UK. We have probably about 3,000 or so responses. It varies depending on which year and the collection point. But the whole idea is to be able to report back on engagement. And as Sarah was outlining, we use our EFS engagement index, but we have also validated that against the NHS's engagement measure, the and several other civil service one and an academic measure as well. So we are very confident that, as I had long thought, to be honest, it matters less which particular model you use, and what matters is that you're measuring engagement and you're doing something about it. The survey itself, it just tells you where you are. It has no impact really. It doesn't change anything for you. So it's about employers, organizations doing something about the results that's see.
And the thing that surprised me at the time is that some people listening might think, 3,000 people doesn't sound that many people across the whole country. But, using your data scientist credentials here, just explain how predictive that is.
So it gives us a good margin of error. That's really the way of thinking about it. And I guess the other way, or the other thing I'd bring in is political polling. People can predict the results of elections based on about 1,000 respondents if it's done well. So it's less about what proportion of the total workforce we've spoken to, and more a question of us having properly sampled a representative group from the workforce, and for us to be then aware of the margins of error, so how accurate the results are.
And just picking up on James's point, yes, it's a representative sample of the UK working population according to age, gender, and ethnicity. And in doing so, we're also able to look at it in terms of organisational sector, size, region, and break it down into many different things. But I think one of the other things that's slightly different as well about how we collect that data is we are talking directly to employees. We're not going through organisations or through a gatekeeper or any kind of way. We're going directly to employees who are not forced to complete the survey, who are willingly doing so. So it gives that kind of quite robust data as well.
Yeah. And can you just tell us a bit more about that, the 3-question figure, just so that people understand where that's come from and how they might use it? I think James probably.
Yeah, sure. So we ask satisfaction with the employer. We ask about advocacy, so how likely they are to recommend the employer, and a version of loyalty. So do they plan to be working for the same employer in, I think it's 2 or 3 years' time? But the reason that we landed on those 3, satisfaction, advocacy, and loyalty, is because actually that's probably the source, the starting point for almost all the engagement models that are out there. And the fact that we have confirmed that our engagement index it aligns very closely with the others that I've mentioned, such as the NHS and civil service, is really good evidence of that. So we're confident that we're measuring it in a way that aligns with all the engagement models that are out there.
Yeah, and the surveys, the other models that James mentions, like I say, that also include academic models as well. So ones that have been sort of both in-depthly theoretically measured and often used quite frequently in high-ranking journal articles, and we do it every year. It's not like we just did it that first year. We do this every single year to just keep double-checking everything, and every single year we see that consistency, that close relationship between them all, which kind of goes back to the point James was making before. It's less on that specific figure or the number, because actually there might be some minor variation, but the stories, the trends, the information is consistent across all of them, regardless of which measure we were then using. Like I say, we do test that every single year just to keep sure it's all on track.
Lovely. So we've sort of painted the picture of the survey and where it's come from and what it's telling us. But let's dig into that a bit more. What is it telling us? Firstly, let's think a bit about the trends since we started that first one just after COVID. It wasn't great news, particularly after COVID, was it?
Yeah, I mean, like we said, we did the first one in 2022, and obviously we weren't able to go back in time to see and measure it actually during the initial years of the pandemic, but we were able to ask people to reflect back on how they felt and test those. So we were able to see that during the pandemic, for many, they felt like their levels of engagement dramatically dropped, which is expected. There was a lot going on, a lot of other things to be thinking about, but I think what was interesting was it didn't drop so significantly for everybody. For others, there was almost a 16% drop, but these were organisations that even before the pandemic weren't really focusing on the key enablers of engagement. They And then during the pandemic, that was, the impact of it, therefore, was really, really seen. Whereas for organisations that were focusing on those things, they started off at a higher level, but then they only dropped by a couple of percent. And they rebounded much quicker than others. But certainly we could see and can track since that coming out of the pandemic, we're still, struggling. Certainly for the first few years, it was very stagnant. There was no real movement in the overall index. And last year was the first time we did see a bit of a movement. And it went from sort of 62 to 65. And then this year we've seen a slight increase again to 66. But again, it's nothing substantial, but equally at the same time, would you see a huge massive jump on that's less likely, but so it's sort of stabilizing, but it's not really dramatically transformed. So they're the kind of general trends that we're kind of seeing, but consistently across every survey we're seeing that there are different experiences engagement according to your background, management styles. So again, a lot of the key themes we're looking at, it's not just something that's happening the one year, it is consistent every single year.
And it must be quite a daunting prospect each year pulling together the report, because of exactly what you've just said, that there's sort of quite a lot of consistency. Things aren't shifting, that quickly as you might imagine they could have done. And yet the reports are different each time and you have different themes. So tell us a bit more about how you do that.
So like I say, first year was very much about the pandemic and how things currently were. The next report then kind of looked at that change as we were coming out of the pandemic, and also this shift from everybody so largely working from home and feeling that this sort of hybrid working was going to continue, and we've seen shifts in different management styles around that. And then each year has been very much informed by conversations. So informed by conversations we're having with people from government, from people in organisations, from thought leaders, and obviously very much by David and Nita, who are a big part of the survey as well. And so each year we ask the same questions, a huge group of those questions. The report tends to focus on some of the additional areas we've added to. So like I say, last year was very much looking around well-being, around the concept of keeping Britain working. And, this year is much more around issues around performance and productivity.
So James, let's think about this year then. Performance and productivity. Is there a connection between engagement and productivity? Leading question.
I'll just say the radical thing first. Yes, absolutely. There's a connection between engagement and productivity. Can we prove it with our engagement survey? No, absolutely not. And nobody could. Very simply, well, for two reasons, really. One, productivity is not well defined or well understood, and the way in which it's discussed is really problematic, I think. And then secondly, we are surveying a random sample of employees who work for different employers, and so productivity is going to be different in all of those cases. But we know from case studies and from linkage work where we're able to correlate engagement with business outcomes, that there is definitely a link through to customer satisfaction, to sickness absence, to well-being overall, and to profitability. So the idea that it's not connected to productivity is insane. I think any employer has the ability to prove that to themselves by measuring engagement and measuring the productivity of their teams. We can't do that at the overall level, but that is what our reports, nailing the evidence and further evidence reports, etc., where we were compiling case studies that we had carefully gone through and checked the results of, do confirm that for us. Yeah.
Sarah.
So yeah, I mean, again, following on from James in terms of how to actually provide all that, to be able to do it in the way that we collect our data, like I say, through employees and directly from employees. This year we were looking much more at those drivers of productivity. We went to, we had a massive review of academic and practitioner outputs to see what were some of those key areas that were coming up. And there were certain areas that were consistently across all the literature being shown as adding to or connecting to productivity. And we narrowed these down to 8. And those were what we then looked at and explored in this year's survey, those 8 productivity drivers, and to see whether they were connected to employee engagements, so both the engagement index, but then also the 4 enablers, which is obviously the whole basis of engagement success. But then also for the past few years, we've looked at measures of individual performance and organisational performance as well. And we could see that those 8 key drivers were very closely connected to all of those. And again, there were things to us seem quite common sense, things from having the right tools and technology, but making sure that those tools and technology were actually reliable. For example, your Wi-Fi is actually working and your laptop works when you switch it on. But things like, collaboration, knowledge sharing, having not only the skills and the development, but actually the ability to use those. I know myself, there's been times you've been on different courses or activities, but then when I've gone back into the organisation, has there been opportunity to actually use those? It can often be very different, but also things like goal clarity and focus, having the opportunity to, we know there's a connection between engagement and innovation, but do you have the time to actually think of different ways of working? Do you have the time to actually test things out? And I think one of the things I've heard a lot in lots of different conferences and sessions I've been to as well is about having that time to think of different ways of working, trying it out, failing, and feeling that you're in that safe environment that you can fail, and in that learn and adapt and try a different way. Because it's almost in those times that it didn't work that we learn how to make it work. So having all those different things there, and fair expectations, fair discussions around workload and focus time. So like I say, not brain science, nothing particularly new, but actually we saw that when all those things were there and present, there was much significant higher impacts on engagement and individual organizational performance than even if just, 1 or 2 were missing.
So this year we have provided something else as well as the report, which we're calling, I don't know if this is a general term, but a glance sheet. So for those people who want to download the report, which if you go to the homepage of the website, across the top there's a banner that you can click on. It takes you to a page where you can download the whole report, but also the glance sheet, which is basically a rather nicely designed 1-pager with some of the key points on there. How do you see people using this report and using that glance sheet to look at what they're doing in their own organisations?
Well, I think, obviously, James and I are fully aware that every single year people will download our nice, hefty, long report and read it from page to page, writing extensive notes. They've got so much time to do that. No, I think, like, as I said before, every year, I mean, there's so much we don't even add to the report because we're conscious of the length of it. So we try to put in the key elements in there. And it's almost like a reference guide to go to, an element that you might jump to. So for example, we did look at AI, and that might be something of relevance to your organization. So you might look at that particular part of the report. But for most people, and certainly in today's world, how we digest information, there is so much information out there that it's so difficult to know how to take things forward, that how you design your content, how you deliver your content is really, really important. So we were working with a fantastic organisation called One Studio, who helped us with the design of this content. And so the glance sheets is their terminology. That's what they use. And it is just that. And it's something we were keen to get some kind of, whether it was a couple of pages or something that was just quick and easy, so people can see what are the key things I need to be aware of. So I have a general knowledge of the issues, but then also to be able to go, oh, actually, we talk about management style as a critical lever. Well, what do you mean by that? Okay, I'll dive into the report and look into it in that particular area and pull out that particular bit. But yeah, in terms of getting a feel for the report, that's very much what the glance sheet's all about.
I find it really interesting. I'm just looking at the glance sheet right now, and the AI section that you just mentioned, and saying that engagement's higher in organisations who use AI confidently, and I looked at some of the other sort of stats and things, and in some ways you sort of read this stuff and you go, well, that would make sense, because it tends to be the more forward-thinking organisations who look after their people and all that sort of stuff. You know, it sort of almost feels like it's not rocket science.
Yeah.
But interesting that we still, you know, are doing this and having to sort of educate leaders and managers in the importance of engaging people with this information, because it, as we know, the stats are still you know, moving, but not much, not quickly enough.
And I think that's the thing. It's kind of there's a combination. There's those who I suppose don't get it, and just don't see it. They don't see the world in that kind of way, and they need therefore the strong evidence, which is what we try to give in terms of the reports and the figures and the numbers of why it's important, because it's not necessarily intuitive to them. Others, they're just so busy firefighting, trying to stay on top of things, trying to tick things over. They haven't got the time, both technically, but also the mental time, the mental opportunity, the space to be able to be thinking about some of these things and looking at some of these things. That actually, you know, yes, we can say spending all our time looking at it, it seems quite obvious, but actually you've just not got that opportunity to stop and reflect and think, or awareness of what others are doing, that it's not always there and apparent. But we can see that, especially, like I say, just not only in AI adoption, and again, I mean, AI is just such a minefield as well at the moment. It's so quickly changing one. It's difficult to stay on top of, but certainly in terms of one consistent pattern we see every year is around organizations prioritizing the people issues, and the huge impact and difference we see in those organizations where senior leaders and managers prioritize the people issues compared to those that don't, in terms of manageable job stress, presenteeism, innovation, performance, and things. And certainly this year, another angle was also looking at that in more detail and around command and control and collaboration. And that's one of the things we saw. It always sort of sticks with me, and I know others have said the same, that we've talked about these 8 productivity drivers, and if you have all these drivers there, then great, you know, you can see all these positive impacts. But actually, collaboration, you know, even if you don't have any of those things, but you have collaboration, and I know this is a keen area for James, so I can see he's keen to speak, so I'm gonna pass over to him to let him elaborate.
No, not at all. I mean, yes, I am passionate about it, but you just already described it really nicely, that the pattern that we're seeing seems to be that command and control is most present where those productivity drivers are absent. So when the organization isn't good at technology, isn't good at sharing information, isn't good at developing their people, etc., that's when you see that sort of impact.
Interesting. And one of the other ones was on the glance sheet. I'm going to keep telling people they can go to that. Is about employee voice needing to be meaningful. What do we mean by that?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, obviously, employee voice is one of the 4 enablers of engagement. So that was highlighted by David Anita, you know, back in 2009, and is obviously something that we've looked at for many years in terms of the different, you know, for example, the 2022 report looks at all the different mechanisms of voice. But one of the things we see, and is heavily supported by research and just conversations, is, you know, having those mechanisms in place isn't enough. You know, having those, sending out your surveys, having those things in place, it's the action. And James mentioned before, it's not just having a figure and a number, collecting the data, it's the action that's behind it that makes the big difference. And obviously with the Employee Rights Act, we were looking in more depth around consultation and some of the issues that are present in the Act. And, you know, we can definitely see across the data where that consultation is happening, where there's that employee representative actually on the board, having something to say and being part of it and responding, having a much more significant impact on engagement, well-being, performance, productivity.
And it's really interesting, or it's really difficult, I think, to enable employee voice in the right way and properly and consistently, because, you know, sometimes you hear things you don't want to hear, or you have, you know, 4 people saying things out of 20 people, and you sort of have to decide, is that, you know, it's not a majority clearly, but it's still for people who aren't going to be happy if, you know, and you've got all those sorts of nuances, and things take a lot longer if you're going to go out and talk to people and get feedback and then go back again with more information. I think out of the four enablers, that's always the one that I think has been the hardest to really get right. What are your thoughts on that? Have you seen anything in the surveys that can help with that? Sorry, I don't know if you can hear any screaming children. I'm in my caravan. And normally the sound's really good, and maybe you can't hear it. Oh, good. I'm on other calls and people go, my dog's barking, and you can't hear that either. So I'll just persevere. I'll just persevere then. You can't hear it.
Keep going with it. It makes it sound real.
So that sort of real life, how do you make it work well, employee voice sort of stuff? James?
Yes, and I suppose one element of that is that employees need to want to speak up, and part of that is that they believe they're going to be listened to. And so one of the patterns that we're reporting on is relating back to command and control versus collaborative management styles. And what we see very clearly is that employees are much more likely to just be silent and not mention things if they are being managed by a controlling manager rather than a collaborative manager. Not only are they taking less time off sick when they're the manager's collaborative, and they're able, and the organizational performance index that we measure is higher when collaboration is there, but people are silent and don't speak up. So the idea that, you know, we're going to be listening and employee voice is important. Well, if the employees themselves don't really buy into that, they don't believe you that you're really listening, then they're not going to speak up in the first place, and so the whole dynamic breaks down.
And then it is that thing, just thinking back to how when we used to talk about effective listening was about doing something or taking account or reflecting back, any of those things, not just asking the question and then ignoring what was being said. And I think, you know, that's a key part, isn't it, Sarah?
Yeah, and one of the things we also looked at as well was questions around employee silence. You know, do you speak up, and the reasons why you might not. You know, and again, we can see that clear relationship down to management style and the kind of culture of the organisation around employees, you know, feeling like they can speak up about issues and about challenges, or many of them going, well, what's the point? You know, nothing will change. And we can see that not just from employees, but also from the managers as well, saying the same thing. And, you know, if the managers are saying, what's the point in speaking up, it's going to filter down, and you can see that. And in fact, I've got the figures in front of me around some of those, and we can see in organisations who do not consult with their employees, and manageable job stress is literally double. Same as the bullying, harassment, and discrimination as well. So it's having that impact, but then that has that impact on employee experience, well-being, wanting to be in work, and that then wanting to go, well, you know, what's the point? And it has that sort of negative impact as well. But yeah, like you say, it's harder. It's harder to have a conversation, to negotiate and discuss. And, you know, we talk about command and control and consultation. And yes, there are organisations where sometimes command and control is needed. You know, for example, in military, or if there's a situation that, you know, in a hospital setting, for example, you know, where you need to say you want this and it has to be done right now, and it's not about having a conversation, but that's about a particular instance, not the culture. And that's the difference. There's a difference in the culture from an awareness that at times I might need to give you a command and you might need to follow it, and those things are different.
So we're just into the last couple of minutes of the show. What should employers be doing? Leaders, HR people, who people who are listening to us.
Reading the
what
report,
should they do with the report? Yeah, obviously read it.
Reading it from
but
page 1 to the end.
What are your sort of closing suggestions for what to do on Monday morning, as David would say?
Yeah. I'm going to defer to James to go first on this one.
I'm just going to go back to my do something about it.
Yeah.
So listening, gathering feedback, absolutely important. And first thing to do is then to feed back what we've heard and that we're going to do something about it. But if that's all you do, if you just talk about it, it can actually have a negative impact.
Yeah.
You know, if you ask people what's on their wish list and they tell you, and then you would completely ignore that, part of them was hoping for that thing on the wish list because they've been asked about it. So raising the expectation that something's going to happen, it's sort of an inherent part of running a survey. We've given you this feedback, now we expect there to be change. When there's no change, it can have a negative impact rather than a positive one. So
Yeah.
for me, the main thrust of all this is doing something about it, to be able to change these things.
Yeah, and following on James's point, it's that action. And then you mentioned earlier on, Joe, about, it might only be a few people's voices that are different, but at least if they feel that they have a voice. I remember doing quite an in-depth case study a few years ago for Engage for Success around this. And there was people there that actually said, look, I'm aware I might not know the big picture. I might not know other aspects that because of my position, I'm not at liberty to know about. But, to turn around and say, okay, yes, I've heard what you've had to say, but unfortunately, there's X, Y, Z reasons we can't do it. At least I feel like I've been heard. But yeah, in terms of, following on from that one thing, it's that I think one of the things we get a lot from people who gather data and already look at data, and then they come along to whether it's the sessions we've ran or conversations that we've had, they've kind of just gone, oh, I've not looked at our data in that kind of way. So, one of the things, like I say, is we've got a representative sample of the UK working population, and we can see that there are different variations. It's not a case of everybody's experience is the same. There isn't one figure, one engagement figure. They vary within an organisation depending on the department, the team, the manager, socioeconomic background, long-term health conditions, sexuality, protected characteristics. All those things are creating differences. And there's different experiences. So actually looking at your data, exploring your data, having the questions to hand to explore that kind of data. If you collect the data, and if you don't, start by looking at how you can collect that data. And obviously, we've developed the index as 3 simple questions that, as we originally said, you can do on a post-it note. It's quick and easy, and in the appendix of every single report tells you how to do it. It's a simple average. It's not a complicated measure. And then we've also got them related again to the 4 enablers of engagement. If you're then wanting to explore where to go from, and because you don't know where to start. So if you're not doing anything, start there. And if you are already doing something, just actually start looking at your data from different perspectives and different areas.
Brilliant. Thank you both for your time today. It's been really interesting. And just to remind everyone, you can go to the homepage of our website, engageforsuccess.org, and the banner at the top will enable you to go to the page where you can download the report and that very handy glance sheet. And just to let you know, next week we have Joe Moffat back talking to Gustavo Rossetti, who's CEO of Fearless Culture and the best-selling author of Forward Talk. And they're going to be talking about AI didn't break workplace culture, it exposed it.
Engage for Success Radio, raising the profile of employee engagement and shining a light on good practice for people who believe there's a better way to work.